Afternoon, friends. Warm welcome to the NABH education series represented by Kaho South Zone and the Tamil Nadu State. For the chapter on IMS, we have Miss Vidya. She's a hospital administrator with over a decade of experience in quality, and she's a deputy manager, medical admin, and quality for Fortis Hospital, Chennai. She is a quality implementer in hospitals from the Health Sector Skill Council and Kaho. We welcome you and over to you, Vidya.
Thank you, Meenakshi, and thank you, Kaho, for the opportunity extended. Good afternoon, everyone. So today's session would be about the IMS, or the Information Management System, for the entry-level standards of a hospital. IMS, or the Information Management System, it has 4 standards in the entry-level standards and 16 objective elements. Let us look at the summary of standards. So IMS 1 talks about medical record management. It has 5 objective elements. And IMS 2 talks about the contents of a medical record, which has 6 objective elements. And IMS 3 talks about confidentiality and security with regards to the medical records. And it has 2 objective elements. And IMS 4 is about retention and destruction of medical records. That is in summary of the IMS chapter. This is the 10th chapter, the last chapter of the NABH standards. The NABH Information Management System aims at continued improvement, is dependent to a large extent on the information generated, stored, and utilized appropriately by the organization. The goal is to ensure that required inputs are available to the right personnel and applies equally to both manual as well as digital-based information system maintained in a hospital. So IMS 1A 1 talks about having an accurate medical record, UHID for the patient and the contents with regards to it. IMS 1A is that every medical record has a unique identifier. IMS 1B is about the organization identifies those who can make entries in a medical record. And IMS 1C talks about every medical record having entry dated and timed. And IMS 1D is about the author of the entry who can be identified. And IMS 1E is about the contents of the medical records which are identified and documented. So with regards to the content of a medical record, what are the components of a medical record? This is something which is very basic to the medical records component. First will be your admission record. Number 2 will be the initial assessment form, the progress notes, the medication charts, the intake-output charts, the TPR charts, the consent forms, and discharge summaries. These components are the major contents of any medical record in a hospital. And what is very important is for us to know as to who are the people who will be making entry in the medical records. And while somebody is signing, while somebody is having a signature done in a medical record, it is important that the name of the author, the date, and the time of entry is noted, because it is important that be identified as to who is actually making an entry in the medical record. So with regards to the best practices, in terms of the medical records, in terms of making an entry in the medical records, first is about writing names and employment number or your registration number. So if there are a few institutions which also have stamping done just below their signature with details of the name and their registration numbers, and cross-checking with the list of initials and the author names in the master document. So there are a few institutions wherein the MRD department has a list of people who make entry in the medical record, and details of their initials and details of their names and their registration numbers prepared as a master document. So that could work as a cross-reference document to find out who has made an entry in the medical record. Third is, in case of an electronic record, you can link the username and password to the author's name, by which you can identify as to who's making an entry in the medical record. And then enabling the provision for electronic signatures, places where we are not able to go through and get in signature in a timely manner, e-signatures can be availed. And it is important that we carry out periodic audits which will ensure that the authors are identifiable in the medical records. And as part of IMS 1, what is it that you need to document in your APEX manual? First will be the policy on documenting medical records. Second is the list of authorized personnel who can make entry in your medical records. Third is the list of sheets in the medical record and their purpose. So that will have to be defined in your APEX manual. Moving on to IMS 2. IMS 2A talks about the record provides an up-to-date and chronological account of patient care. The IMS 2 chapter talks about having the medical records as basis for ensuring that the continuity of care is maintained. So IMS 2A talks about how the records will have to be up to date and placed in a chronological order for the appropriate patient care. IMS 2B is about the medical record containing information with regards to reasons for admission, diagnosis, and plan of care for the patient. IMS 2C is about operative and other procedures which the patient has availed in the hospital, whether those details are incorporated as part of your medical record. IMS 2D talks about the medical record containing a copy of the discharge summary, which is duly signed by the appropriate and qualified personnel who's providing care to the patient. IMS 2E is about the, in case of a death of a patient, whether the medical record contains a copy of the death certificate indicating the cause of death, the time and date of death. IMS 2F is about care provision and having access to the current and past medical record. In case somebody wants to ensure that appropriate care is provided to a patient and wants to go back and look into what has happened to a patient during the previous hospitalization, IMS 2F talks about how we have systems in place to have access to the current and past medical records. With regards to the plan of care, what are the components of a patient care plan is it has to have the desired outcome defined. The plan of care should include preventive aspects, curative aspects, and rehabilitative aspects also documented. Please note that the care plan should be periodically reviewed at least once in 24 hours just to know if the patient is progressing well, whether the plan that has been defined at the initial course of admission is helping the patient recover better or not. So it is important that we review the care plan. And with regards to the documentation of procedures in your medical records, all procedures that the patient is undergoing, all procedures or surgical interventions that the patient is undergoing in the hospital should be included, including the details of presenting complaints, the provisional diagnosis, and the surgical sites to be mentioned. And the brief procedure notes should also be mentioned. The details in terms of the implants used in case it is used will have to be documented as part of your medical records. Post-op orders, both from the anesthetist side as well as your surgeon side, will have to be documented as part of your medical record, as part of your procedure or surgical notes. And further care plan should also be documented. With regards to defining or listing out the cause of death, it is important that we know as to what should not be mentioned as cause of a death. So basically, the list of modes of dying should not be mentioned as a cause of death, like cardiac arrest should not be part of it, cardiopulmonary arrest should not be mentioned, respiratory arrest, respiratory failure, failure to thrive, multi-organ system failure should not be documented as a cause of death. So what are the ideal practices and how do we go about with it? Medical records needs to have a description of all aspects of patient care and make sure that the entries are dated, timed, and you have the author identified, and fill all the identified sheets and the relevant sheets which are relevant for the patient who's admitted, and document mandatory information. For example, in your consent form, for example, in your MLC cases, there are a few mandatory things that will have to be filled in. Make sure all those columns are filled in. And provisional diagnosis and reasons for ordering a certain investigation is something very important that we all need to take care into. And the roles in terms of the doctor and the MRD personnel, how you can contribute towards this effectiveness is by undergoing training on what are the appropriate documentation requirements and conducting periodic active cases or chart reviews and audits in your while the patient is admitted in the hospital will help us to make sure that the appropriate medical records are maintained. And the hospital should ensure that complete and up-to-date medical records are available 24/7 for access. Moving on with IMS 3. IMS 3 is talking about the medical records and how it is the integrity, the confidentiality and security of records will have to be maintained. IMS 3A talks about documented policies and procedures which exist for maintaining the confidentiality, security, and integrity of information. IMS 3B talks about privileged health information which is used for purposes identified or as required by the law and does not disclose without the patient's authorization. So it is very important that as a hospital, we collect a lot of information, a lot of data that we make use of in the hospital. But what is more important is how we use it and how it is being maintained and how it is being secured is what is important. And IMS 3 talks majorly about it. The medical records officer and their role in terms of how we maintain the medical records is from the time to time it has to reach the MRD till its destruction. Privileged health information refers to any information about the health record that could help in identifying the patient. It includes patient history, current health status, diagnosis, and treatment provided. Privileged health information can be used as required by laws or purposes which have been identified. So one common discussion that most of the hospitals have, one common query that we have is whether hospital information, your patient-related medical condition can be disclosed, whether the case sheet can be accessed by your insurance healthcare providers. So something that was clarified, in fact, one of the training sessions which I attended in Kaho was that when a patient applies or avails for health insurance only, they give in a blanket consent for sharing their health information to the insurance agencies. So there is no necessity to get a separate consent or approval from a patient to share information relating to their health while availing for the insurance services. Same with the medical legal cases. So if somebody has, from which the court of law is asking for certain details, we are obliged to share the information to the related agencies. So these are the list of disclosures that we make to the government agencies with regards to the medical legal cases reporting, the birth and death reporting within 24 hours, notifiable diseases intimation to the government and the corporation agencies, child and adult or domestic abuse details, which are all probably part of your MLC cases reporting, and any judicial or administrative proceedings which will require details of a patient for appropriate course of action will have to be shared. So what should be documented as part of your IMS 3 in your APEX manual will be the policies for the MRD and inpatient services in your APEX manual, and policy with regards to the privileged health information will have to be documented as part of your APEX manual. Moving on with IMS 4, the documented policies and procedures exist for retention, time of records, data and information. So basically IMS 1, 2 and 3 talks about who can make entries in a record, what are the components of a record, and how do you maintain it, how do you secure the data. So we come to the end of the chapter wherein we talk about how the data will have to be retained and how do we actually go about destructing the medical records once the appropriate timeline is up. So IMS 4.8 talks about documented policies and procedures which are in place on retaining the patient's clinical records, data and information. IMS 4B talks about the retention process, provision of expected confidentiality and security. And IMS 4C talks about the destruction of medical records, data and information in accordance with the laid down procedures. So while the institution lays down procedures with regards to the destruction of medical records, we need to keep in mind the applicable laws relating to the medical records retention. So what is important is probably your guidelines will say that your medical records will have to be stored for minimum period of 10 years from the date of last visit or last treatment in the hospital. What is important is for organizations, while you're defining your retention period, make sure that you have a time period which goes by the guidelines which is set, and also slightly extended period above your guidelines, so that it will help your compliance with regards to your legal requirements also. So with regards to destruction of medical records, first is identification of medical records to be destroyed. So based on your organization's policy, wherein you have defined the timeline for destruction of medical records, taking into consideration the appropriate guidelines, you will have to identify which are the records that has to be destroyed. And you need to have your internal system of having an approval for the destruction of medical records, followed by the notification to the appropriate authorities. Some organizations even give a paper publication just before the destruction of medical records. So that notification before destruction is required. And there is a method of destroying the medical record. What is important is you should make sure that since these are all privileged information with regards to a patient, while destroying, you should make sure that these medical records do not reach out to the hands of people who are probably not the right ones to take information from. So there should be an appropriate method of destroying the medical records, making sure that the patient's details are not revealed to the outside world while destroying. So all those need to be taken into consideration while you're defining your destruction policy. And then finally, the information about the destroyed medical records. So while you have defined your retention period, while you have your approval for your destruction, and after you have notified the concerned authorities about the destruction, what is more important is you need to know which are the records that you have destroyed. So that information about the destroyed medical records, you as an institution will have to be aware. So in terms of the IMS 4, what is it that has to be documented as part of your APEX manual? First is your retention policy. Second is the protocol for destroying medical record. Third is the list of destroyed medical records, and the date of destruction has to be documented. So all these will be part of your APEX manual. It says any particular timeline for MLC case. So yeah, the NCA has defined it as 10 years. But I think it's more of an organization-based decision that you take, because our organization believes that MLC cases, there is a chance of bringing it up at any given point of time. So we keep MLC as a permanent record. We do not destroy it. At least electronically it is placed. So MLC is a call that you need to take for a minimum period of 10 years. It is expected, but preferable to have it permanent. Okay, what guidelines are available for retention of records? So there is the MCI guidelines is available. In case you want me to share the guidelines, I can probably just share the link later in the group or something like that. I do not have it with me readily available. I can share it in the group probably. Meenakshi and team can share it with you all later. Can you specify the minimum and maximum period to store the medical record? That's what I was just saying. So it is more in terms of what the organization defines. So basically 10 years is what they say for any medical record which has to be stored, 10 years from the last date of visit of the patient in your hospital. And beyond that is a call that the organization takes, but a minimum of 10 years period. And do we need any fire safety precautions in the medical record room? Definitely. In fact, that is something that you all need to take care of because here in our institution, what we do is we have a very stringent audit mechanism of the MRT zone also. So we make sure that, fireproof racks are placed, and you have the compatible appropriate extinguishers in place, CCTV cameras in place, smoke detectors in place. All those fire safety precautions are mandatory as part of your medical records room. Absolutely. And which information to be stored as a hard copy only? I wouldn't say as a hard copy only. I am not too sure if I'm okay to answer on that. Most of the hospitals, I think, haven't still gone to EMR yet. So hospitals, I think, have the physical copy, hard copies of almost everything that the patient has availed services in the hospital. Probably your OP records is something that hospitals are keeping it as a soft copy. The remaining all is a hard copy, I feel. I hope it has answered the question. If anyone from the panel also wants to add on, please feel free to add on which information to be stored as a hard copy. And what is the other? Okay, the next one is any guidelines for video records. The guidelines are there, but what is more important is whether you have kept the patient informed, if you've taken the consent from the patient and the concerned family members for having a video recording done or a video counseling done. And what is more important is, as an organization, you will have to define the timeline at which these recordings are taken as a backup, and how well this is stored and how well this is retrieved later for clarifications and all those. But what is important is for you to keep the patients and the family informed that the video recording is happening. That I would say is important. That's the guideline. Okay. Can you please brief about the network information software securities? I am not too technical in terms of the IT thing. if somebody from the panel can answer with regards to it, please go ahead and do it. Or in case you want me to come back to you with regards to the information software security and network security, I can come back to you with the details along with the video. Probably I'll share it with the Tahoe Secretariat and you can go through the guidelines.
Yeah, basically, if the HIS is served, installed in a server, a local server, then the firewall is a must, okay, to protect these servers, and it should be protected from any cyber attacks, either internally or externally. So that is a must.
Okay, so I think Adel sir has just answered for that. And which kind of statistics should be managed by MRD? This is again a decision that you as an institution will have to define. It changes the institution to institution. Ideal would be like every data that the patient is going through, with regards to birth, death, with regards to condition-wise, with regards to your footfalls, with regards to your inpatient service days, with regards to your average length of stay. All these data are usually monitored or usually maintained by your MRD team. But of course, this is a call that you as an institution will have to define. And should we keep soft copy after destruction of files? Not necessary, because you, while you're destructing a file, you are actually having a policy defined. You are going to be notifying the concerned persons that you are going to be destructing the records which have extended the retention period. It is not required. But if you have the space, if you have the cloud purchased for your institution, go ahead and keep it. And medical record technician should be qualified, should be properly qualified better, because there is always a chance that, somebody who is more qualified to do their job, if he or she is posted, they are supposed to be performing better. So it is better that you have a qualified person taking care of the medical records department. Okay, when giving patients data to insurance company, can we give IP charts, original or photocopies of charts? What is the requirement of the insurance company, I would say, because most of the times I don't think they ask for the original as such. Apart from the original discharge summary, I don't think they ask for the IP chart original. They'll probably come to your location and go through it and scan the copies. If required, you can share it with them. Originals, I don't think they generally ask for it. Adel sir or somebody from the team wants to add on to it?
Yeah, you're right. Nowadays, the insurance companies have moved on online portals. So they've been asking the hospitals to scan and send all these patient records by email or on their portal. So photocopies of that would suffice.
Yeah. And who can enter into the MR department, the medical records department? That is again something that you need to define as to who can. You will have to have access control or restrict entry into your medical records department. So who you let inside your MR department is something that you as an institution will have to define, sitting with your medical admin team and sitting with your entire operations team. So that is something that the institutions will have to define as to who can enter the MR department. But yeah, the entry into the MR has to be slightly restricted. You cannot have everyone to just walk into the MR department because, just to prevent theft or unnecessary movement inside the department. So that's a call that you as an institution will have to take. And what is the procedure for handling copies of indoor patients to patients or any party asking for it? Okay, this is something that you will have to define. So basically, the usual policy that hospitals are following is that your medical head or say your medical superintendent or your DMS or your medical director, whoever is the medical highest authority, any request for an access to indoor patient case sheet will have to be approved or authorized for access by the medical head. So that is the procedure that usually hospitals will follow. However, in case of situations where your medical head is not available, there should be a protocol, there should be an escalation matrix which has to be defined, saying that if X is not there, Y, if Y is not there, Z. So that has to be defined by you as an institution. Can we discard MLC files after solving a case in court? That again is something that you have to define. In case you as an institution have defined that I will not discard my MLC file, it is going to be permanent. As long as the institution runs, I'm going to have my MLC files maintained. In that case, you cannot discard your MLC file. And how do you define that your case is solved in the court? Because we never know, like probably in the High Court level, it would have been solved. You might go to the Supreme Court and you might again want to take up your files for reference. So MLC, in case you as an institution has taken a policy decision to retain it permanently, you cannot. You will not discard it. Okay, guidelines for OPD and IPD records maintenance. By guidelines, I don't know what you mean. Like as we have just discussed through the various standards in the IMS, what is important is for you to ensure that the safety and security and confidentiality of these records are maintained. The places where you store your records will have to have appropriate pest control measures done. And in case you're having e-records of your OPD, you're having scanned OPD records maintained, what is the procedure that you have in order to control access to those OPD records. So all those are things that you can just list out as part of your guidelines. I hope I've answered that, Mr. Syed, because guidelines is a very broad term that you're asking. So owing to the lack of time, this is all I could address. Okay, and there is a quality indicator about the incomplete case sheets. How can we say the case sheets are incomplete? Okay, very simple. During our IMS session also we had spoken about, say for example, in your medical records or even your consent forms, take for example your consent forms. So you have the initial patient's demographic details, your consultant details, your QHID, all those as your components of your top of your consent forms. And then you will have a few details with regards to signature. You will have few details with regards to complications of a procedure. You will have details with regards to whether alternative benefits have been explained. You will have details probably in case you are reusing certain devices. Say if it is a consent for your dialysis unit, you're reusing your dialyzer, you might have details related to that explained. So all those components which you have defined as part of your medical records will have to be updated, will have to be completed, will have to be filled. So that is how you check for the completeness of a case sheet. So that is how you do it. And this is a very time-consuming procedure. It is important that hospitals practice the active case sheet audit, wherein somebody from your MRD team, somebody from your nursing, or somebody from your quality team actually goes through while the patient is admitted in the hospital. Somebody can randomly go and check for the completeness of your case sheet. In case it's not complete at that level only during the hospitalization, you can probably have a flip on, you can have a post on pasted over there just to say what is the deficiency that you have identified. And just before the patient leaves the hospital, there are chances that you will complete those deficiencies identified. So that is how we monitor the quality indicator with regards to incomplete case sheets. I hope I've answered that. Then for MLC cases, whether the original copy to be given to the police or the court. Yes, there is no question of not sharing the copy of, the original file to the police or the court, because we are bound by the legal system. So we will have to share it. As long as you have it documented, as long as you have your medical admin head who is authorized or approved for sharing the medical record, it is okay to share the original copy. For how many years an organization needs to keep the OPD and IPD records? IPD, I told you that MCI is indicating 10 years period from the last date of treatment or last date of when he or she has availed services in your hospital. OPD, there is not anything defined. It is something that we define it on our own. So more in terms of hospitals keep it for a minimum period of 3 to 5 years. It depends on institution to institution. But IPD is for a minimum period of 10 years. Beyond that is a call that you can take. Can we outsource medical records department? This is a call that you will have to take depending on weighing the pros and cons. If you're asking me for my opinion, I would say no. because having the MRD in-house only will still have a lot of incomplete case sheets which are found, and even better to bring about closures, and even better to monitor how the case sheets have been completed, even better to see how effectively the content has been maintained. It is better that we have our MRD in-house rather than we keep it outsourced. So in case you had asked for my opinion, I would say don't outsource it. Okay, so there are some more questions probably here in the chat box, sir.
Chat box, yeah.
Okay, so
maybe
the
last two you put.
Okay, can you specify the minimum and maximum period to store the MR? I just said 10 years is the minimum period. That's like 10 years is when you will keep the medical records, IPK sheets. The maximum is something that you can define. You can say 20 years, you can say 15 years, or you can even say 10 years is all that I'll keep. That's up to you to define. And how to handle the deficiency case record? Is there any duration for completing the deficient records? Okay, so basically, before the files reach the inpatient files reach the medical records, there should absolutely be no deficiency. That is what is the ideal practice. So in case you're asking what is the duration for completing the deficiency records, during the hospital stay of the patient, that's like the ideal duration to complete the deficient records. I was talking about the active case sheet audits being done. So how well you carry it out and how well you finish off your deficiencies that you find during your active case sheet audit will ensure that there is no deficient record while it reaches to your medical records. But in case it is not possible in most of the institutions, including ours, we are trying very hard. What can be done is get the support of your medical admin head. So because most of the times, apart from the nursing support, what is more important is we have the deficiencies found with regards to the consultant's compliance, with regards to the doctor's compliance. So what institutions do is have doctor-wise details in terms of how many deficiencies per file is found for a certain doctor. So this is something that we discuss in our close group meetings with the consultants. So while discussing in terms of the deficiencies, the numbers, we display also the numbers of the other specialty doctors. So this, in a way, encourages the others to make sure that their files are less deficient. They make sure that they complete their files. So that's how you will probably handle. That's one way by which you can handle your case records. The other way is, of course, most hospitals do it is like pushing the nursing team to go behind the doctors, get it done, have everything coordinated through the nursing team. So it's a system that you will have to evolve as an institution. Okay, can we give original reports with patient in case of medico-legal case? I don't understand what original report you are talking about. In case you are talking about the diagnostic things, you're talking about, I don't know what you're talking about. Because in case if it's an MLC death, you are anyways not involved in the process of writing a death certificate. So patient will have to be sent to for a post-mortem. So in case you're talking about the diagnosis, like somebody with a road traffic accident, undergoing treatment, and they need a few investigations that they've undergone, reports related to that, yeah, absolutely, you should still share it with the patient. Why not? And to avoid medical negligence, how MRD can help? To avoid medical negligence, if you can, Dr. Adel, if you can just be more specific in terms of what you mean by medical negligence, I can probably help. But I would say a simple example. For example, a patient who's undergone a certain surgical procedure. For the surgeon and anesthetist to actually have your post-operative order well documented will actually help your nursing team to enhance and carry out whatever is the appropriate care that is required for the patient while giving them the post-operative care. So that in a way will enhance the clinical outcome. That in a way will make sure that the medical negligence is avoided. So I hope I've answered that, but in case you are meaning something else, please be more specific. Then can you share the information, soft copy and retention of medical records? Sure, I will do that. I will share it with Peeta and Meenakshi, and they will probably share it with you. And what else? Okay, I think we are done with the Q&A, sir. In the chat box, do we have a few questions, sir? In MRD, should not use fire safety equipment. What? Okay, sorry, sir. In MRD, should not use fire safety equipment. What are the precautions can take to prevent spoiling records, ma'am? MRD should not use fire safety. That's what I was just talking to you about. You can have fireproof containers for storing of your important records like your MLCK sheets and all those you can have. You can have smoke detectors in that place just to ensure that, you will identify a potential fire threat in your MRD. Restrict your entry into your MRD. Keep your medical record clutter-free. I mean, in the sense that apart from your medical records mandatory requirements, have minimum things. Do not have any source of fire within your department. All those are little preventive measures that you can do. I would suggest, Mitra, you should just do a risk assessment for your MRD exclusively. Find out how you can prevent fire from happening inside the MRD. Okay, again, somebody is asking about the specifications with regards to the minimum and maximum period. I think that was already answered.
Yeah.
Okay, in case of fire, the records are destroyed. Do we store? Sorry, Adel, somebody is asking again.
No. Go ahead. Yeah, please.
In case of fire, records are destroyed. Do we store records anywhere else? In case of fire, yeah, I mean, first thing is we have to save lives. That is what is more important than saving your records. So, I mean, which place is fire free is something that nobody can answer. That depends on how well you have systems in place, how well you have done your risk assessment to avoid any fire from occurring in a certain department, in your medical records department. So that is again something that you all have to figure it out. Who should sign first on the consent form, doctor or the patient? Okay, so the consent form in itself, it is something that is done while the doctor is explaining things to the patient, and the procedure has to be, the consent has to be taken. So while the doctor explains things to the patient and gets his consent first, his signature first, then the doctor signs. That's how it goes. Because there is always a chance that the doctor end up signing, then later the patient will be like, no, I am having second thoughts. I do not want to go ahead with the procedure. So in that case, the consent form doesn't hold good. So it is important that we get the signature of the doctor first, then followed by the patient. Okay, what does cloud mean? Is that what you're asking? Okay, cloud, I'm not a technical person, but again, very little thing that I have tried and learned about it is basically cloud system is about having our data stored in the internet, in a platform, in a digital mode. So wherein the data is actually stored in not physically in your live location, but more so specific to say you have a cloud system license specific to your institution. It is stored in a digital form in that particular server, or it is stored, some places do outsource the cloud. So it is a source wherein you can have the information stored in the other platform and retrieve it later when you have a need to access to it. I hope I've answered everything, sir.
Yeah, thank you, Vidya. And thank you again, participants, for joining us today.